One could argue that none of it would have happened if the Alpha King had simply married the daughter they put in front of him, the way a sensible king was meant to. But then again, if the man had bothered to marry any of the daughters paraded past him across 3 long years, House Aldane would never have grown desperate enough to present a girl who was not truly theirs to give. And if they had not been so desperate, Elira would have kept her mouth shut, the way a maid who wished to keep her tongue in her head generally did. So really, if one followed the thread all the way back to where it started, the whole calamity belonged to the king, every last inch of it. Which was a great comfort to Elira later, on the nights when she needed something to blame that was not herself. But that came after. On the morning it began, Elira knew only that she was cold, that her feet ached in borrowed shoes, and that she had stood against the wall of the great hall of Duncaro for the better part of 2 hours, holding a fan she was not permitted to use. She was good at standing against walls. A maid learned early that the trick to surviving a grand house was to become a piece of the furniture, a thing the eye slid over on its way to something worth looking at. Elira had spent 14 years perfecting the art of not being seen, and she was, if she said so herself, the finest wall in the Greywold. At the far end of the hall, on a chair that was not quite a throne, sat the reason they had all come. Varin of the Greywold, the Alpha King. He was younger than the portraits led on, and stiller than any living thing had a right to be, one hand loose on the arm of the chair while House Aldane made its case, his face giving away precisely nothing. That was the part no one had warned her about. Not the shoulders, not the pale wolf eyes, the stillness. He listened the way a deep well listens to a dropped coin, patient and bottomless. Lady Ottiline Aldane did the talking, as she did everything, at length and with great feeling. Beside her, dressed in silver that cost more than Elira would earn in her life, stood Cosima. Poor Cosima. That was the thought Elira could not put down. Poor, lovely, frightened Cosima, who had wept into a basin at midnight while Elira held her hair, and who was being sold to a king this morning as gladly as a lamb to a butcher. The family called it an honor. Cosima had stopped calling it anything at all. There was a lie at the center of the whole performance, and Elira knew its exact shape, for she had helped lace it into the girl that morning. The old king's pact had asked for a daughter who came willing and unpromised. Cosima was neither. She had a boy she loved in the mill country and a heart already spoken for, and the family had decided that a thing the king could not see could not trouble him. They had not reckoned on what the king could see, or rather, on what he could smell. "She comes to you gladly, your majesty," Lady Ottiline was saying, hand pressed to her breast. "It has been her dearest wish since girlhood, has it not, Cosima?" "It has," Cosima said. Her voice was lovely and dead. Elira watched the king's nostrils flare, the smallest movement, there and gone. She watched something cross his face that was not quite anger and was worse than anger. He had caught it. Of course he had. He was an alpha in a room full of frightened people, and a frightened person could no more hide the sour reek of a lie than they could hide a scream. He was going to reject her. Elira understood it a whole breath before it happened, the way you understand a cup is going to fall the instant it leaves the table. And she understood what the rejection would cost. Not the family. It would cost Cosima, sent home ruined, a girl the king himself had turned away. It would cost the mill boy, who would not be let to want damaged goods. It would cost every servant in a house that had gambled everything on this morning and lost. The king opened his mouth to end it, and Elira, the finest wall in the Greywold, stepped away from the wall. "She doesn't." The words were out of her before she had decided to say them. Every head in the hall turned. She felt the turning like a wind. "She doesn't come gladly," Elira said, and having started she could not stop, for the truth once loosed had a will of its own. "She weeps every night. She loves a boy in the mill country and she is being given to you against her heart, and everyone in this hall knows it, and not one of them will say so to your face because they are all afraid of you. So there. Now someone has. She is a good girl and she deserves better than to be sold under a lie, and you deserve better than to be lied to in your own hall, and I am very sorry, and I will go now." Silence. The kind of silence that has a floor and walls to it, that you could walk out into and be lost in. Lady Ottiline had gone the color of ash. Cosima was staring as though Elira had grown a second head, and the king had gone very still indeed, that deep well stillness, and he was no longer looking at Cosima at all. He was looking at Elira. He rose. He came down off the dais without hurry, and the closer he came, the more Elira understood the enormity of what she had done, for the man was enormous and quiet, and his eyes were the flat pale of a winter sky. He stopped an arm's length from her. She braced for a blow, for a word that would end her. He did neither. He breathed in. She watched him tip his head the barest degree and draw the air of her into his lungs, like a man tasting something he had been hungry for without knowing it. Something moved behind his face then, something that cracked the stillness clean down the middle. And for one unguarded instant, the Alpha King of the Greywold looked at a maid in borrowed shoes, as though the floor had opened under him. Lady Ottoline found her voice. "Your Majesty, forgive her. She is nobody, only a servant. She will be whipped and dismissed, and you need never think of her again." "Her," said the king, as though the lady had not spoken at all. The word dropped into the hall and lay there. "Your Majesty," Lady Ottoline whispered. He did not look away from Elira. "You have presented the wrong daughter," he said, low and certain, and meant for the whole room to hear. "This one, her, I will have this one." And Elira, who had made herself invisible for 14 years, stood pinned in the sight of the most dangerous man in the Greywold with no idea on earth what she had just been chosen for. They took her out through the servants' passage, which was at least familiar, though nothing else about the next hour was. She remembered little of the walk. Nessa's hands hard around her arm, Pell running ahead down the stair with the news, so that by the time they reached the low kitchens, half the household already knew, and the other half was pretending not to stare. And under all of it, the flat calm that comes after a fall and before the pain, the sense that she had ruined everything and did not entirely regret it, and would regret that too before the day was out. "You spoke to the king." Nessa had backed her into the pantry and stood with her spine against the door as though holding off an army. Nessa was 50 and built like a doorframe and had never in Elira's memory been frightened of anything. She was frightened now. "You told the Alpha King to his face that he was being lied to, and then he said her, and he meant you." "Yes. Gods keep us." Nessa pressed the heel of her hand to her mouth. "What were you thinking?" The trouble was that Elira had not been thinking. She had only been unable, for one moment, to keep on not thinking, and now the whole shape of her small, careful life lay in pieces on the flagstones. Pell burst in without knocking. He was 16 and gangly, and his eyes were enormous. "Lady Ottoline's in a state," he reported, breathless. "Shut up with the steward, saying she'll have you flogged, saying you shamed the house on purpose, saying she'll see you in the stocks before nightfall." "She can't." Nessa's voice cracked. "The king spoke for her. Everyone heard it." "That's just it." Pell looked between them. "Nobody knows what the king meant by it. You can't just point at a maid and make her a." He could not even say the word. It was too large for the kitchen, and there it was, the thing that turned her flat calm to cold water in the belly. For Pell was right. A king could say her and mean a bride, or mean a whim, a warning, a cruelty dressed as favor. A man who had been lied to did not always want a wife when he pointed at the one honest mouth in the room. Sometimes he wanted a lesson made of her. She had no way to know. She had looked into that still pale face and found nothing she could use, only that bottomless quiet and the moment his face had cracked open, which she did not understand at all. The pantry door opened a third time, and this time everyone went quiet, for it was Merrick. He came in and shut the door gently, and the kitchen seemed to steady around him the way it always did. Merrick had been steward of House Aldane since before Elira came to it, and he was the nearest thing to a father she had ever owned. He had found her half-starved at the winter gate when she was 7, a foundling with no name worth keeping, and taken her in himself, taught her her letters, kept the harder hands of the house off her. Everything Elira was, she was because a tired, kind man had decided one cold morning that she was worth the trouble. He looked at her now with such sorrow that her eyes stung. "Oh, child," he said quietly, "what have they done to you? Not what have you done. What have they done?" And that, more than anything, was why she had loved him her whole life, for he was the only one who had ever looked at a disaster she had caused and seen first the ways the world had failed her. "Merrick, I'm sorry." Her voice wobbled. "Cosima was breaking, and I could not stand there and let them sell her under a lie. I could not. I know." He crossed the little room and took her cold hands in his warm ones. "I know exactly what you did and why, and there is not a wrong thing in it. You told the truth in a house that cannot bear it. Now listen, for I have little time. You will say nothing more to anyone. Not to the lady, not to the king, not to any servant sent to draw you out. Keep that brave tongue behind your teeth and let me handle what comes. But what does he want with me? That, said Merrick, and for just a moment something flickered behind his gentle eyes, something quick and cold that was gone before she could name it. Is what frightens me. A king does not choose a maid. There is a reason under it, and until I know the reason I will not have you within his reach. I have kept you safe 14 years, Elira. Trust me a little longer. She would have promised him anything. She had never in her life had cause to do otherwise. She was still nodding when the bells began, not the hour bell, the great bell, the gate bell, the one that rang for arrivals of state, and it rang now in a house that had cleared its gate of guests not 2 hours past. Pell went white, and Merrick, who was never surprised by anything, went very still in a way that Elira would remember later, when she finally understood what stillness in that man had always meant. That is the gate, he said softly. An arrival of state. And no one told me it was coming. Which meant it had come over the head of the steward of the house, and there was only one man in the Greywold who could ride through the gate of House Aldane without leave from anyone. The king had not summoned her, the king had come. He received her in the long gallery because Lady Ottiline had insisted on giving him the finest room in the house, and so Elira came to learn the king's true intentions, standing beneath 200 years of Aldane ancestors who had never once had to share their walls with a servant. He had brought no army. That was the first thing she noticed, and the strangest. A king who meant a cruelty brought men to witness it. Varon of the Greywold had brought 4 riders and left them in the yard, and he stood alone at the window with his back to the door, looking out over the same cold gardens she had walked 1,000 times with a basket on her hip. "Leave us," he said, without turning. Lady Ottiline made a sound of protest. Merrick at Elira's shoulder went rigid, but there was no arguing with an alpha's command laid flat across the room, and one by one they went, the lady stiff with fury, Merrick last of all, and Elira felt his reluctance like a hand trailing off her sleeve as the great doors closed and left her alone with the king. For a long moment he did not speak. Then, still watching the garden, "You are afraid of me." "Yes," Elira said, for she had learned that morning where lying got a person in this man's presence. He turned at that, and there it was again, the ghost of that crack in the stillness, quickly smoothed. "Good. Fear is honest. I have had a great deal of the other thing lately, and I find I have lost my taste for it." He studied her. "You know what I have come to say." "No, Your Majesty. That is the whole trouble. No one will tell me, and I would very much rather you simply said the cruel thing plainly than make me wait for it." "You think I have come to be cruel." "I think men like you do not choose women like me for kindness." Something in his face shifted. "No," he agreed quietly. "I don't suppose we do." He crossed the gallery toward her, unhurried, and stopped a careful distance off, as though he had learned that morning that she was a thing that startled. "I will say it plainly then as you ask. I have come to claim you, before the house, before the court, before the whole of the Greywold. You will come to Duncaro as my intended, under my protection, and no hand in this house or any other will touch you again." The floor seemed to tilt. "Your intended?" "My mate," said the king. And there, precisely there, was where Elira knew he was lying. For she would have felt it. Even a foundling maid knew how the bond went, the pull, the tug behind the ribs, the way the world narrowed to one person the instant an alpha found the one made for him. She felt no such thing. She felt fear and cold feet and the wild racing of her own heart, and under all of it the plain presence of a very large man who happened to be a king. No pull, no bond, nothing at all. He was inventing it. She did not know why, but she knew a lie when it stood in front of her wearing a crown, and this one was standing very close. "That isn't true," she said. His brow rose. "No? I would feel it if we were bonded. I feel nothing. You are making it up, and I cannot for my life think why a king would trouble himself to make up a mate out of a maid. But you are, and we both know it, and I would rather you told me the real reason." For a moment, he only looked at her, and she braced for the anger. Instead, the corner of his mouth moved, the barest ghost of something that might, in a warmer man, have grown into a smile. "You are going to be a great deal of trouble," he said, almost to himself. "I can see that already." Then the near smile faded. "You feel nothing. I believe you. But I would ask you to consider, Elira, that a thing can be true whether or not you can feel it." The bond found me in that hole this morning. It has not troubled to consult you yet. That is not the same as its not being there. It was a good answer, and that was the maddening part. It was exactly the answer a liar would give, smooth and unprovable, and also exactly the answer a man telling a strange truth would give, and she had no way to tell the two apart. "Why me?" she said. "Truly, of all the honest people in the Greywold, why the one standing in a house you rode to over its steward's head? You did not choose me. You chose this house, and I happened to be standing in it." The king's eyes sharpened, and for the length of a heartbeat the mild manner dropped away, and she saw the thing underneath, quick and hard and watchful, a mind that had been 3 moves ahead of her the whole while. "Now that," he murmured, "is a very good question. You should hold on to it." He stepped back, and the mask slid smoothly into place, king again, easy and remote. "I will send for you at week's end. Bring nothing. Everything you own I mean to replace, and everything you are, I mean to keep exactly as it is." He paused with his hand on the doors, close enough now that she caught the scent of him, cold air and iron and something under it she had no name for. "You asked why you. When you are ready to hear the true answer, ask me again. But I warn you." His pale eyes found hers. "You will not like it, and once you have heard it, neither of us will ever again pretend this began as anything but what it is." Then he was gone, and Elira stood alone beneath 200 years of strangers with her heart slamming, and the king's warning settling into her like a stone into a well, falling, and not yet touching the bottom. Out in the yard, unseen by her, a man in a steward's dark coat watched the king ride out through the gate he had not been warned of, and his kind and tired face was doing something it never did where anyone could see. It was afraid. Duncaro swallowed her whole. They dressed her in grey wool, finer than anything the Aldanes had ever put on their own daughters, and they gave her rooms with a fire that no one expected her to lay herself, and a girl named Wren to lay it for her, which Elira found so unbearable that she rose before dawn each morning and laid it herself anyway, before Wren could catch her at it. A week in, and she still flinched when servants bowed. A week in, and she still could not sleep in a bed that soft, and lay awake in it instead, waiting for the cruelty to arrive. It did not arrive. That was the strange thing. What arrived on the 8th morning was the king. "Come with me," Varenne said from her doorway, as though it were the most ordinary thing in the world for a king to appear at a maid's door before she had finished her bread. "I have a use for you, and I would rather show you than explain it." He brought her to the petition hall and sat her in a curtained alcove above the floor, where the wives of old kings had once watched the business of the realm without being watched in turn. "Say nothing," he told her. "Only watch. When it is done, you will tell me what you saw." Then he went down and took the not quite throne, and for 3 hours Elira watched the Greywold bring its troubles to its king. She had never once been permitted to simply look at people. A maid looked at floors, at hems, at the bottoms of cups. But an invisible woman in a curtained alcove could look all she liked, and Elira found she had been looking her whole life without knowing it, storing away 1,000 small readings of how a body betrayed a mind. So when the miller from the Low Country came to swear his grain tithe had been paid in full and stolen on the road, she watched his hands, and when he left she was ready. He was telling the truth, she said, when the hall had cleared and Varenne came up to the alcove. The grain was paid and taken, but the clerk who wrote it down was not. He stood behind the pillar, and he did not once look at the miller, only at the ledger, and a man only refuses to look at another man he has already decided to rob. Your grain was not lost on the road. It was lost in that clerk's hand, and I would have the ledger for the past 2 winters looked at by someone who cannot be bought. Varenne was quiet for a moment. Then, softly, "I smelled the lie on the clerk from 30 feet. I could not have told you which of the 50 men in that hall it belonged to." He looked at her with something new in his face. "I can tell you a man is lying. I cannot always tell you where the lie is standing. You looked at a room full of strangers for 3 hours and found the exact place." A pause. "Do you know how rare that is?" "It is not rare where I come from," Elira said. "It is only that no one asks the furniture what it has seen. I am asking." And there it was, the thing she had been braced against all week, arriving from a direction she had not thought to guard, not cruelty, interest, Real interest, sharp and warm and fixed entirely on her, and she did not know what to do with it, for she had no practice at being the thing in the room that was looked at. "Why me?" she said, because she could not help it. "You keep circling it and you never land. I am a foundling maid. I have no name, no blood, no gift, but a habit of noticing things. There are cleverer women in this castle, and prettier ones, and women who would not lay their own fire out of sheer contrariness. You could have any of them. So why the one woman in the Greywold who does not want to be had?" He studied her a long moment. "Perhaps," he said, "that is the reason, that you do not want to be had." Then lighter, turning for the door. "Walk with me. I have kept you in a dark box all morning, and you have earned the air." They walked the high gallery as the light went amber and long. He asked her questions as they went, easy ones, drifting ones. How House Aldane kept its accounts. Whether the steward held the keys himself or trusted them to another, who came and went at the winter gate. She answered without thinking much of it, warmed by the attention, glad to be useful, and did not notice how each answer was a stone he set carefully aside to build with later. They came out onto the covered walk above the stable yard, and that was where Elira's eye, doing the thing it always did, caught the wrongness. A groom on the roof of the far byre. Wrong. Grooms did not go on roofs at dusk. Wrong shoes for a groom, too good, and he was not mending the thatch. He was kneeling behind the ridge line with his arms braced and his shoulder set the way a man sets his shoulder against a heavy pull, and the last of the light ran down something in his hands that was not a thatching tool. She did not think. There was no thought in it at all. She hit the king with the whole of her weight, and they went down together against the walk's stone rail, as the crossbow bolt came through the space where his throat had been, and struck the pillar behind with a sound like an axe going into green wood. Then they were on the ground, his arm hard around her cheek against the cold stone, and her left shoulder was screaming where the bolt's fletching had opened it on the way past, a hot wet line she felt more than saw. Below, a whistle, sharp, clean, deliberate. And the groom on the roof was gone over the far side and away, unhurried, the way a man leaves who has done this before and expects to do it again. Elira lay with her heart slamming and waited for the king to be afraid. He was not afraid. That was the thing she would turn over all that night and many nights after. He came up off the stones smooth and controlled. He put his body between her and the yard from pure habit, and when he looked at the pillar where the bolt still stood buzzing, his face held no shock at all. Only a cold, tired recognition, the look of a man greeting an unwelcome guest he had been expecting since breakfast. "You are bleeding," he said gently, reaching for her shoulder. She pulled back from his hand. "You are not surprised." Her voice did not sound like her own. "Someone put a bolt through the air at your head, and you are not surprised, Your Majesty. How many times?" For half a breath, something real showed through, and then the mask came down over it, smooth and kind and closed. "Let me see to your arm," he said. She let him. But she was keeping score now, and the column of things that did not add up had just gained its first hard mark. She meant to solve him. That was how it began, and she would want that remembered later, that it had begun as sense and not as folly. A man was trying to kill the king, and the king was hiding it, and Elira was the sort of person who could not leave a wrong-shaped thing alone. So she watched him, as she watched everyone, and told herself it was for the puzzle. She watched him hold a whole council in the palm of his stillness. She watched the performance go up in the morning like a portcullis and come down at night when he thought no one was looking, and she began to learn the exact weight of the difference between the two. And somewhere in the watching, without her leave, the reason for it changed. It crept up the way cold creeps into a room, so slow you do not feel the moment it arrives, only that at some point you are no longer warm. One night he came to the old scullery, of all places, where she had gone because the fine rooms would not let her breathe, and a woman raised in kitchens sleeps better near the smell of banked coals. She was sitting on the flower bench in her shift with her wounded shoulder bare and bound when he found her, and instead of being ashamed she only moved over to make room, and he sat, a king on a flower bench, and neither of them said anything clever for a long while. "You come here to think?" he said at last. "I come here because it is the one room in this castle that does not expect me to be anything." He was quiet. Then, "I have never had such a room." She looked at his profile in the low red light, the tiredness he only ever wore in the dark, and felt the thing in her chest shift and settle into a shape she could no longer pretend was suspicion. She looked at his mouth. She caught herself doing it and looked away, and found when she looked back that he had caught her at it, and was not smiling, which was somehow worse than if he had. He came to her shoulder each evening after that, on the pretext of the wound. He would unwind the binding with hands far too careful for a man his size, and she would sit very still and stare at the wall and feel each pass of his fingers go down her spine like struck flint. He never hurried it. That was the unbearable part. He drew the tending out long past need, and she let him, and neither of them named what the tending had become. She lay awake after in the too soft bed, with her body a live wire and her own honest hands pressed flat to the coverlet because she did not trust them, and thought about the shape of him on the flower bench, and a great deal more than the shape of him, alone in the dark with her breath gone shallow and shameful, and underneath all of it ran the one cold thread she could not warm. She felt no bond. She had waited for it. Some traitor part of her had wanted it, wanted the pull he swore was there, the tug behind the ribs that would have made all this wanting into fate instead of foolishness. But there was nothing. Only the plain human ache of a woman who wanted a man and had no excuse of destiny to hide behind. If the bond was real, she could not feel it, and if she could not feel it, then everything she felt was only her own, chosen and undefended, and that frightened her more than any bolt from any roof. It came to a head, late, in the armory gallery, where he had asked her to look over the muster rolls, and then asked her nothing at all, only sat across the lamp from her and watched. "Stop it," she said. Her voice came out raw. "Stop what?" "Looking at me as though you have decided something. Every day you decide it a little more plainly and you will not say it, and I cannot keep standing in the doorway of a thing that has no name." She was on her feet without meaning to be. "Tell me it is the puzzle. Tell me you keep me close because I see what your nose cannot, and you have a killer to catch. Tell me anything that is a use because I know how to be used. I do not know how to be wanted, and you are teaching me, and it is cruel, and I would rather you stopped." The gallery was very quiet. He rose. He came round the lamp slowly, the way you cross a floor toward something that might bolt, and stopped close enough that she had to lift her chin to hold his eyes. "And if it is not a use," he said, "if I simply want you, with no roster and no killer and no reason a clever woman could pick apart, what then?" "Then you are lying." "I have never once lied to you." He was near enough now that she felt the warmth come off him. "I have kept things from you. That is a different sin, and I will answer for it. But I have not lied. Ask me anything and smell it for yourself, since you have decided you cannot trust the bond to tell you." His voice dropped low. "Or tell me to go, and I will go, and I will never trouble you with it again." She should have told him to go. She thought of it. And then she thought of the flower bench, and the tired dark, and the careful hands, and she was so tired of being sensible, of standing outside every warm room her whole life with her nose against the glass. "Prove it," she heard herself say. He kissed her, and every careful thing in her went white and silent at once. There was no bond in it. She noticed that even then, even as his hand slid into her hair and her knees forgot their work, that the thing rushing through her was not fate and not magic, but only her, only wanting, plain and enormous and entirely her own. And that was what undid her past saving, not destiny, choice. She fisted her hand in his collar and dragged him down and kissed him like a woman who had decided, for once in her whole careful life, to have the thing she wanted with both hands and let the reckoning come. The reckoning would come. But not that night. That night, there was only the lamp, and the two of them, and the crossing of a line that neither of them, whatever came after, would ever be able to step back over. The feast for the vile delegation was the largest Duncaro had held in a generation, and Elira stood at the edge of it in blue silk, feeling like a knife laid out among the spoons. Vielle had come to make a marriage. Everyone knew it in the way a court knows everything and says nothing. Princess Ione had been brought 200 miles of cold road on the understanding that the Alpha King wanted an alliance sealed in blood and heirs, and had arrived instead to find him betrothed to a foundling nobody could account for. The princess bore it with a watchful grace Elira could not hate. The envoys did not bear it at all, and the room hummed with the danger of powerful men made to feel foolish. Across the hall, Varon caught her eye and the corner of his mouth moved, that private near smile that was hers and no one else's, and the tightness under her ribs eased a fraction. He crossed to her through the crowd with the easy authority of a man who had never once in his life had to wonder if he was welcome. "You look," he said quietly against her ear, "like something I should not be allowed to keep. I look like a maid in a stolen dress. You look like the only honest thing in a room built on lies, which is precisely what you are, and precisely why I want you." He tucked her hand into the crook of his arm. "Come, let me steal a moment of air before Vael decides to start a war over the seating." He took her out onto a colonnade above the dark gardens, where the music thinned and the night came up cold and green off the hedges. "You hate this," she said, watching him. "Hate is a strong word. You are lying, and you told me you never lie." That surprised the truth out of him in a short breath of laughter. "I am, aren't I?" He turned to face her, and the charm went out of his face and left something behind that she had only ever seen in the dark of the scullery. "I have been doing this since I was 19, Elira. The smiling, the being exactly what a room needs, so no one looks too long at what I am not. My father died and left me a crown and a court full of men who had loved him and were waiting to see if the boy would crack. So the boy learned not to crack. He learned to perform it so well that even he cannot always find the seam anymore. The smile he tried on was thin and did not hold. And I cannot decide if that makes me clever or only very tired." She reached up and touched his face. His breath caught. The thin smile fell away entirely, and what was under it was young and undefended and afraid to be seen. "You are not the performance," she said. "There is a man under it, and I have been getting to know him in a scullery for a fortnight, and I like him a great deal more than the king." Something cracked open behind his eyes. "Elira," he said, rough, and kissed her. And this time the world came apart. It was not the wanting. She knew the wanting by now, its heat and its weight. This was something else, pouring in through the place where they touched and not hers at all. Relief, fear, a fierce aching tenderness with grief folded inside it. All of it his, distinct and foreign, pressing into her chest like a second heartbeat, learning the rhythm of her own. The bond. The thing she had sworn 100 times she could not feel. It had waited, exactly as he said it would. And now it opened under her like a trapdoor and she was falling through into him. She jerked back with a gasp, her hand to her mouth. His eyes were black and wide. "You felt it." It was not a question. She could feel his hope through the open place between them, bright and terrible. "Elira, you felt it. I know you did. I felt you feel it." Every instinct she had built over a lifetime of standing outside warm rooms rose up at once and slammed the door. "It was nothing," she said. "A trick of the wine." The hope went out of him like a snuffed candle. She felt that too, through the bond, felt it go out and felt the careful stillness come down over the place where it had been, and hated herself, and could not stop. "Of course," he said quietly. "The wine." And his voice had gone smooth and distant, the voice he used on Vael, the one he had sworn he did not use on her. A servant came along the colonnade with a tray, 2 cups of wine dark as blood in the moonlight, and murmured, "Your Majesty," and offered it. Varen reached for a cup, and Elira's whole body rang wrong. She did not decide to move. Her hand shot out and knocked the cup from his fingers, and it shattered on the stone, wine spreading black across the pale flags. "Do not," she said, already down in a crouch over the ruin of it, and there it was, under the fruit and the oak, the bitter almond edge she had smelled once before in a still room when a rat catcher mixed his wares. "It is in the wine. Almond and something under it. This was not meant to make you merry, Your Majesty. This was meant to put you down for good." The color left his face, and the servant was gone, melted back into the bright hole. "You will say nothing," Varen said. His hand closed over hers where it gripped the broken stem, hard and cold. "Not to the captain, not to Vael, not to a living soul. There is a foreign princess 50 feet away, and a treaty balanced on a knife, and if it is known that a man tried to murder me under my own roof tonight, I will have a war before the candles gutter." "So you smile," she said, disbelieving. "You go back in and you dance, and you let someone who just tried to kill you walk free through your own hall." "Yes." She wanted to shake him. "This is the second time. A bolt, and now this. You are in danger and you will not even let me name it. I need you to trust me, just this once. There is a shape to this that I am close to seeing whole, and I cannot move until I can move all at once, and every alarm you raise before then costs me the only advantage I have. Can you trust me a little longer? Everything in her that had ever been a servant, trained to watch and warn and put her body between the house and the harm, said no. But the bond was still open, and through it she could feel he was not lying, that whatever he hid, the fear in him was real and the care was real, and she heard herself say, "All right, I promise." Relief flooded him, and flooded her through the bond, and he pressed his mouth to her forehead. "Wait for me here," he said. "I will not be long." And then the mask came down, and the king walked back into his feast as though nothing at all had happened. She gave him a slow count of 30, then she followed. She kept to the edges, the way 14 years of invisibility had taught her, watched him smile and turn aside the envoys of veil, watched him drift by careful degrees toward a side door, and watched the smile drop from his face the instant he was through it. She followed him down 2 turns of a dark stair to a small muniment room where the old records were kept, and stood in the black of the corridor, unable to make her legs carry her away. Then she opened the door. Varen stood behind the record-keeper's table with a chest thrown open and a sheaf of House Aldane's sealed correspondence in one hand, letters in Merrick's own close writing, letters that had no business in the king's hands, and when he looked up and saw her in the doorway, for the first time since she had known him, the man who always had the answer before you finished the question had nothing to say at all. "Illyra," he said, very quiet, very careful. "This is not what it looks like." For the first time since she had known him, the king who always had the answer before you finished the question stood with his mouth open and no answer in it. "Then tell me what it is," Illyra said. "You have Merrick's letters in your hand, in the king's own record room, on the night someone put almond in your wine. You told me to trust you. So trust me back. What is going on?" He set the letters down. When he spoke, his voice had gone quiet and even, the careful one he used on frightened councilmen, the one he had sworn he would never use on her, and hearing it now was worse than the poison. "I have been investigating your steward," Varen said, "for the better part of a year. The revenues of the Greywold have been bleeding out through House Aldane for longer than that. Grain, coin, the muster that never arrives where it is sent. All of it dressed as waste and confusion, and none of it waste, and none of it confusion. It is theft, Illyra, patient and enormous, and every silver mark of it runs back to one careful hand." He touched the letters. "His. The men who have tried to kill me these 3 months carry his coin in their purses. I have proof of the theft. Tonight I came for the proof of the blood." The floor felt very far away. "That is a lie." "You know it is not. You have felt me not lie to you for weeks." She had. That was the horror of it, the bond still faintly open between them, and no sourness in him anywhere, only grief. "Then why?" she said, and her voice cracked down the middle. "Why me? You said to ask again when I was ready for the answer I would not like. I am asking, why did you say her in that hall? Because you were the way in." He said it plainly, because she had asked for it plainly, and it was the cruelest thing she had ever heard spoken gently. "I had been hunting away to Merrick for a year and could find no crack in him. And then a house paraded its daughters at me, and a maid stood up and told me the truth in a room where truth could get her killed, and I smelled that she was honest, and I smelled that she was mine, and then I learned whose ward she was." His jaw worked. "The steward's own girl, the one soul in the Greywold he trusted without watching. You were the door, Illyra. I would be lying if I said the choosing of you did not begin as that." She had known it was coming, and it still went into her like a blade under the ribs. Every question he had ever asked her, easy and drifting, about keys and gates and who Merrick trusted. She had thought he was courting her. He had been mapping a man through her. "So all of it," she whispered, "the petition hall, the scullery, your hands on my shoulder every night, all of it was you walking yourself closer to Merrick through me." "No." His hand came up. "The beginning was that. What it became was not, and I think you know the difference or you would not be shaking. Illyra, I have not touched a soul in years without weighing what it cost me. You I could not stop touching. That was not strategy. That was the one thing in all of this I could not plan." She wanted to believe it so badly that she made herself step back from it. "You should have told me, yes. You watched me put my own body in front of a bolt for you. You knew I trusted that man with my life, and you let me go on trusting him while you built a gallows under him, and you never once said a word because. She stopped because she could see it now, the shape of what he had not said. Because you knew I would not believe you, you knew I would take his side, and you were not willing to lose your door before the trap was sprung. He did not deny it, that was his answer, the not denying. There is more, he said, and something in how he said it made her go cold all the way through. And you will want it to be the lie, it is not. When I opened the old records, hunting the root of him, I found a thing I was not looking for. 14 years ago there was a house on the northern march, House Corvin. A good house, an old one, put to the sword in a single night. The whole line ended, their lands and their name folded quietly into the holdings of the men who did it. The record says, the last of them, a child of 7, died in the burning. He looked at her as though she were made of glass. The record is wrong. The steward who opened Corvin's gate to its murderers that night, who took his cut of its lands and buried the account in Aldane's ledgers, kept one thing back from the fire, not out of mercy. A man like that keeps a loose end where he can watch it. He carried a girl of 7 to the winter gate of House Aldane, and he set her to service, and he raised her to believe she was a foundling who owed him everything. Stop, Elira said, but even as she said it, something in her had gone still and listening, because a girl of 7 at a winter gate was not a stranger's story. It was hers. It was the one fact of her own beginning she had ever been given, told to her so often and so gently in Merrick's own voice, that she had never thought to wonder how a man came to be standing at a gate in the snow, with exactly the right child in his arms, at exactly the right hour. She had a memory she had always filed as a bad dream, and never as a thing that happened. A blue door, heat on her face, a hand pulling her, not away from the fire, but through it. You were not found at that gate, Elira. You were left there, by him. You are the last of House Corvin, and the kind man who saved you is the man who killed your mother and father and told you it was charity. Stop it! She was shaking so hard now the words came apart. You will say anything. You have used me from the first hour, and now you would take Merrick too, the one thing in my whole life that was never a lie, and you would poison that as well, so I have nothing left to hold that is not you. It is monstrous. He found me freezing. He gave me letters and warm hands and a name to answer to. You give me a room full of your lies and ask me to burn the only man who ever loved me on the strength of them. I'm not asking you to burn anyone. I'm asking you to look. No. The tears came and she let them. Not everyone is like you, Your Majesty. Some people are simply what they say they are. She turned for the door on legs that barely held her. Elira. His voice broke on it, and even now, what came out of him was not, I am sorry, and not I can explain, but the plainest thing, the thing that would follow her down every corridor for months. I need you, please. She walked out into the dark and did not look back, and did not know yet that every word he had said was true. Merrick found her in the dark of the lower corridor as if he had been waiting, which he had. Child. His hands came down on her shoulders, warm and steadying as they had been her whole life. You are white as a shroud. What has he done? And because it hurt too much to hold, she told him. The theft, the letters, the accusation, the terrible thing about Corvin and the winter gate. She wept it into his coat, the way she had wept 100 small childhood griefs, and he held her and made the low soothing sound he had always made, and told her no king would take her from him. He has used you, Merrick said gently into her hair. From the first. I feared it from the moment he pointed at you. A man does not raise a maid to a throne for love, Elira. He does it for a use. And now he has used you up, and he means to be rid of you. And he has built you this cruel story so that when he sets you aside for his foreign princess, you will be too broken and too shamed to speak against him. He said there was proof. Of course he did. Merrick drew back to look at her, his tired, kind face grave. Listen to me. This king is not what the songs make him. The theft he lays at my door is his own. The men who die around him die because he has them killed, to frighten the court into giving him what he wants. The poison in his cup tonight was his own hand, so that he might cry murder and purge every house that ever stood in his way. House Aldane first, all of us, you among us. His grip tightened. There is only one way to stop a man like that. He must be shown to Vael for what he is before he strikes, and it cannot come from me, a steward. They would say I grasp for power. It must come from the one voice in that hall no one can doubt. His own honest bride. If you tell the princess and her envoys what he is, Illyra, they will believe you, and he will fall, and good houses will steady the realm after him. Yours among them, if you like. I would see you a lady yet. Illyra stood very still in the circle of his arms, and did what she had done her whole life without ever once turning it on him. She looked. The poison in his cup tonight. She turned the words over. The colonnade had been empty. She had knocked the wine from the king's hand and crushed the cup and told a living soul about it, and that living soul was Varen, and no one else, not one, not Nessa, not Cosima, not a passing guard. She had promised to say nothing, and she had kept it. There had been 3 people who knew a cup was poisoned on that colonnade tonight. Herself, the king, and the man who had sent the wine. She had not told Merrick about the wine. He should not know there had been wine at all. The corridor went very cold and very clear, the way a room goes when the last false thing in it falls away and leaves only the shape of what is true. She had spent 14 years learning to find the one lie standing in a crowded room, and she had never once thought to look for it in the man holding her, because you do not smell the air you have breathed since you were 7. But she smelled it now. It was all over him. It always had been. Every word the king had said was true. And if that one thing was true, then all of it was true, and the whole of her life turned over in the space of a breath and showed her its underside. The winter gate, the letters he had taught her, the hard hands he had kept off her, so that she would stay soft and grateful in his. He had not saved a foundling from the cold. He had hidden the last witness to a murder and dressed the hiding up as love, and she had spent 14 years thanking him for it, had wept her every grief into that coat, had carried his voice in her own mouth so long she had mistaken it for her own thoughts. Every kind thing was real, he would say later, and that was the horror she would carry longest. That the kindness had been real and had been a leash, both at once, and she had never once felt the collar because it had been buckled on before she was old enough to remember a time without it. She did not let it reach her face. That was the hardest thing she had ever done, harder than the Great Hall, harder than the bolt. She kept her face crumpled and wet and young, and she leaned back into the coat of the man who had murdered her mother and father, and she made herself say, in a small broken voice, "Yes, all right. Tell me what I must do." Something eased in Merrick's shoulders. She felt it and hated it. "Good girl," he murmured, the way he always had, and it landed in her now like a hand closing round her throat. "Tomorrow, the princess holds council in the East Hall. You will come with me, and you will tell them what the king is." "I will," Illyra said. And so they walked toward morning together, the murderer and the last of his crime, and it was the longest walk of her life, because she had to carry into that council chamber the one weapon she had, which was the truth, and turn a trap built for a king back onto the man who had built it, and she had nothing to do it with, but her own 2 hands, and a voice that had already once changed everything by refusing to stay quiet. The East Hall of Dunkaro was full of Vile, and Vile was angry, and anger was exactly what Merrick had come to feed. Princess Ione sat at the head of the long table, still and watchful, and around her the envoys of her father's realm bristled and murmured. Varen stood among them because a king does not hide from his own counsel, and when Illyra came in at Merrick's side, his whole face lifted for one unguarded instant, and then he saw who she walked in beside, and read it the only way it could be read, and the light in him went out. He thought she had come to bury him. She let him think it. She had to. "Your Highness," Merrick said, bowing to the princess with the grave sorrow of an honest man forced to a hard duty. "It shames me to bring this before you, but your alliance is being made with a man of blood, and his own betrothed will tell you so. Illyra, tell her Highness what the king is." Every face in the hall turned to her. Ione, leaning forward, the envoys, hungry, Merrick, certain of her, and Varen, who thought she had chosen at last, and had chosen against him. She looked at him for one breath. "I am sorry," she told him with no words at all. "I should have believed you the first time." Then she turned to the princess. "The king is the truest man in this hall," Illyra said, "and the traitor you are looking for is the one holding my arm." The room snapped taut as a bowstring. Merrick's hand tightened on her. "He will tell you a jilted maid says wild things," she went on, fast before he could move. So do not take my word. Take the one thing he cannot explain away. Last night a cup of poisoned wine was put into the king's hand, and I struck it from him, and I told no living soul of it but the king. 3 people in the whole world knew there was poison on that colonnade last night. The king, myself, and the man who sent it. She turned and looked full into the face that had raised her. An hour ago in the corridor, you comforted me for the poison in the king's cup, Merrick. How did you know there had been a cup at all? For a moment, the kind, tired face did not change. And then it did. She watched it happen, watched the warmth drain out of it like water leaving a cracked basin, and what was left underneath was a thing she had lived beside her whole life and never once been permitted to see. Search his rooms, Elira said to the princess, not looking away from him. While he stands here and cannot reach them, you will find a poisoner's ledger and the account of a house called Corvin that was put to the sword 14 years ago, and coin enough to pay every blade that has come at your ally this season. And you will find, your highness, that I am not a maid at all. I am Elira of House Corvin, the child this man carried out of a burning he ordered, and hid in a scullery so that no one would ever come looking for the last witness to what he did. Enough? Merrick's voice had lost all its warmth. Cosima, seated small and pale among the Aldane party, made a sound and stood. I have known her all my life, she said into the ringing hall, and she has never once told a lie, not for anything. A sympathetic girl who had been given nothing to do her whole life but watch, choosing, at last, to be seen. She is honest to the bone. That is why he chose her to hide behind. I will swear it before any god you name. And Merrick looked at Elira, and the last of the kindly steward fell away, and what regarded her was calm and cold and almost tender in its certainty. I gave you a life, he said, as though the crowded hall had emptied. I stood in the ashes of Corvin with a screaming child in my arms and every reason to finish the line clean, and I did not. I carried you through the snow. Every kindness was real, and that is the part you cannot bear. I did love you. A man is allowed to love the one thing he has had to keep buried. His pale eyes did not blink. And you have gone and cut your own throat with it, in a foreign court, for a king who used you a great deal worse than I ever did. You gave me a cage and called it a life, Elira said. You are right about one thing only. You should have finished it, because the child you kept alive grew up watching, and she sees it all now. Merrick moved. She had known he would. She had watched this man her entire life, every tell, every shift of his weight, and when his hand went for the blade in his sleeve she was already stepping wide, because the one thing he had never counted on was that the girl he taught to notice everything had finally turned the noticing on him. The knife came where she had been. She was not there. And then Captain Roan and half the guard of Duncaro were on him, and it took 4 of them, and he did not go quietly, and it did not matter, because it was done. You taught me to watch, Merrick, she said as they hauled him up. You should not have. They dragged him out. The guards came back within the hour with what his rooms had held, and it was everything she had promised, and one thing more, a small tarnished signet with the Corvin crest worn nearly smooth, kept 14 years in the pocket of the man who murdered the house it belonged to. Elira held it in her palm and did not weep. She put it away instead, deep in a pocket of her own, the first thing she had ever owned that was truly hers. The Princess of Vielle sat back slowly, and the anger went out of the room, and in its place came the particular silence of a great many powerful people, rearranging everything they had believed. And then it was only the 2 of them, the king and the woman who had saved him, and Varin looked at her as though he had never seen her before. You came to save me, he said. After everything. You still. I came to stop a traitor, Elira said, and made her voice flat. Because if she let it be anything else, it would break. It is what I am good at. Do not make it more than it was. The hope in his face flickered. The bond is real. You felt it. You know it now. It does not matter whether it is real. She was already stepping back from him, from the pull of him, from the thing that wanted so badly to fall into his arms and be held. You looked me in the eye for weeks and used my love for the man who murdered my family. You let me hold him and mourn to him and call him father while you knew. A bond does not undo that. I am glad you are alive. You will be a good king. She made herself say the last of it. But I cannot trust you. I do not know if I ever will again. Elira. Just her name, roughly, the way he said it when he had run out of everything cleverer. I would take back the manner of it if I could. Not the choosing of you, only the lie I wrapped it in. Do not make promises to me in a room full of the people who watched you get away with it. She could feel the bond straining toward him even now, treacherous, and she held it shut with everything she had. You are very good in rooms. That is the trouble. I never once knew which part of you was true. She saw it land in him, the understanding that he had broken a thing that would not simply mend. He did not reach for her this time. That, at least, he had learned. She walked out of the East Hall a lady of the grey wold with her own name at last, and a dead man's signet in her pocket, and it was the loneliest walk she had ever taken. They gave her back everything, and it was ash in her hands for a long time. House Corvin was restored by royal decree before the moon had turned, its name cleared, its northern lands lifted out of the ledgers Merrick had buried them in, and returned to the child who had survived. Elira of Corvin, they called her now, and she made herself answer to it, though for the first month it felt like a coat cut for someone else. She kept catching herself in the old habits, rising before dawn to lay her own fire, standing along the wall at her own table until she remembered the table was hers. 14 years does not wash off in a season, and a name handed to you by decree is only a word until you have earned the right to feel it fit. She did not sit and grieve. She had never in her life been permitted to sit and grieve, and she did not know how to start, so she did instead the thing she knew. She went north. She walked the burned foundations of a house she remembered only in pieces, a blue door, a woman's low singing, the smell of a particular bread, and she stood in the black rectangle where the hall had been, and waited to feel something enormous, and felt instead a small, clean grief, quiet as snow, for two people she had been too young to keep. Then she had the foundations cleared, because the living came before the dead. She learned the names of the tenants Merrick had bled for 14 years, and set about the slow, unglamorous work of making them whole, and it turned out that a woman who had spent 14 years watching exactly how a household is robbed knew a great deal about how to stop the robbing. She was good at it. She had always been going to be good at it. That was the strange gift Merrick had never meant to give her. He had made her invisible, and the invisible see everything. And now she turned all that hard-won seeing toward building instead of surviving. The king let her go north and did not follow, but the letters followed. They came 2 and 3 a week in his own hand, and she told herself each time that she would not read them and read them. Some were short, some ran for pages, some were not about her at all, a question of a boundary stone, a dispute over a mill, as though her plain honest judgment were still a thing worth having. One read only, I keep writing the same word 100 ways, and it is always sorry, which is a small word for what I did, and I have no larger one, so I will keep sending the small one until it wears a groove. Another, near the bottom of a long page she had sworn she would not finish, I did not fall in love with a door. I walked through a door and found you on the other side of it, and I have been ruined for every other room since. There was one more, later, that she did not answer and could not throw away. I am yours. I was yours in a hole full of liars before I knew a single true thing about you, and I remain yours in the full and certain knowledge that you may never be mine. That is not a bargain, it is only a fact, and I am tired of hiding my facts from you. Cosima wrote too, and Nessa, and even Pell, whose spelling was a crime against the alphabet, and Wren, the girl who had laid Elira's fire at Duncaro and now signed herself your loyal spy in the enemy camp. In the early weeks their letters were fierce on her behalf. Let him freeze, Nessa wrote. You owe that man nothing. But the season turned, and the letters changed. He cleared your tenant's back rent himself and told no one, Cosima wrote. Cosima, who had gone home to her mill boy, at last, with the king's blessing and a purse to marry on. Pell reported, with awe, that the king had asked him what flowers grew wild at Corvin, so that he might not send the wrong ones. By the 5th month, even Nessa had come round. He is wretched, she wrote, and you are wretched, and the whole north has to watch the pair of you be wretched at a distance of 200 miles, and I am too old for it. Talk to the man. There is nothing to say, Elira wrote back. I am building a house. I would like to be left in peace to build it. Then one evening in the 6th month a letter came that was different. It was very short. Elira. You have made yourself plain, and I have no right to keep pressing where I am not wanted. You deserved the truth from me, and I gave you a strategy instead, and no number of letters unmakes that. So this is the last of them. I will not write again. Be happy. Build your house. Varen. She read it twice. It was exactly what she had asked for. She sat with it a long while as the fire burned down and could not understand, for the life of her, why the getting of the thing she wanted felt so precisely like losing. He kept his word. No more letters came. And the warm patient thread under her ribs, the one she had spent 6 months strangling shut, stayed exactly where it was and would not fade, until the night the rider came from Dunkero with mud to the knees and news that changed everything. The king was to be married, to Vael, in a fortnight. She told herself the whole hard ride south that it was duty. He was her king. A king walking into a marriage he did not want was a wound to the realm, and she was a lady of that realm now, and it was her business to speak. That was all it was. It was not all it was. She had let herself believe the alliance dead, killed the night Merrick fell. It was not dead. Vael had been wounded in its pride by the whole affair, and a wounded pride wants feeding, and the council had found the old cure, the cure kings had always paid, which was to give the princess what she had been promised in the first place. The king, and Varin, who had let Elira go, who had run out of letters and out of hope, had said yes, because a man who believes he does not deserve the thing he wants will always find a way to hand himself to the thing he does not. She felt it before she reached the gates. She had kept the bond throttled shut for half a year, and now, frightened, she let it crack open for the first time since the East Hall, and it hit her like a door blown wide in a storm. Grief, deep and bottomless. Resignation, worse than grief. The particular grey quiet of a man laying himself down on an altar and calling it duty. He was not being forced, that was the unbearable part. He was going gladly, the way you go gladly to a thing you think will pay a debt. She came into the great hall of Dunkero at a dead run, and the whole of the court turned, and it was, she realized as she crossed the threshold, the same hall, the one she had first stood against the wall in, with a fan she was not allowed to use. The one where a hooded certainty of a man had looked past every lie in the room and chosen the one true thing in it. Now it was full of lies again. The alliance, the smiling, the two houses making a bargain of a man and calling it love. Princess Ione stood beside the king in Vael colors, composed and unreadable. And Varen wore the performance-like armor, the smile up, the seam hidden, giving the room exactly what it needed so no one would look too long at what he was not. And a foundling maid who was a lady now stepped away from the wall. He does not want this. Every head in the hall turned. She felt the turning like a wind, the same wind, come round again. Forgive me, your highness. Illyra's voice carried and did not shake. You are a clever woman, and you deserve better than a bargain with a man whose whole heart is standing at the back of the room. He does not want you. He wants no alliance sealed in a lie, and I think, if you are honest, neither do you. She looked at Ione, and Ione looked back, and something passed between the two of them that had been quietly true for a fortnight. There are other ways to bind two realms than a marriage neither party wants: trade, a pact, a friendship. I will help you draw one myself, on my honor as Corvin, if you will only not take a man who is not yours to take. Elira. Varen's voice was raw. What are you doing? She turned to him and dropped every guard she had, and let the bond stand wide open between them so that he could feel it too, all of it, the 6 months of strangled longing, the thing she had refused to name. You told me once to ask again when I was ready to hear the true answer, she said. Why me? Why did you say her in this hall on that morning? I am ready now. Tell me the true one. He looked at her, and the performance fell off him piece by piece, and what was left was the man from the scullery, undefended and afraid to be seen. Because the bond found me the moment you spoke, he said. That was never the strategy. That part was never a lie. I told the court a mate to keep you safe, and I told myself a door to keep from having to admit it. But the truth I would not say to you or to myself is that I breathed you in across a room full of liars, and I knew, before I knew anything else, before I knew your name or your house or what had been done to you, I knew that I was yours and there would never be anyone else. And then I learned who you were, and I understood that I had found the one soul the whole crime had been built to erase. And I was never, not for 1 hour after, going to let you out of my sight. The hall was utterly silent. You said you could not trust me, he said. You were right not to, so I will not ask you to. I will only tell you that I am not marrying anyone tonight, or any night, that is not you. And if it is never you, then it is no one. and Vael may have my head for the insult if a friendship will not serve. He looked at her, the way he had looked at her in the great hall on the first morning, as though the floor had opened under him. That is the true answer. You were warned you would not like it. Elira crossed the floor to him. The court held its breath. And she did not fall into his arms, and she did not say yes, not yet, because she had learned the hard way what it cost to be swept, and she meant to do this last thing standing on her own 2 feet. Ask me again, she said quietly, taking his hands in hers, when it is only us, and no hall, and no crown, and no one to see. Ask me then. She felt the hope come up in him through the bond, terrified and bright. And find out. Vael went home with a trade pact worth more than any wedding, and a princess who had never wanted a husband she had not chosen. It was Elira who drew the pact, as she had promised in the hall, 3 long evenings across a table with Ione and a stack of ledgers. And it turned out that 2 clever women, who had each been offered as a bargain to a man, could build a far better bargain between themselves. Ione and Elira parted at the north gate, as something the songs would later, wrongly, call unlikely, and that the 2 of them simply called friends. He did not ask her again at once. That was how she knew he had truly learned. He came north instead, and he did not come as a king. He came the way anyone comes courting, badly and often, and with no advantage held in reserve. He argued millwrights with her across her own war table until her steward threatened to resign in writing. He walked her half-built walls in the cold, and asked her real questions about the load a rebuilt hall could bear, and listened to the answers as though they were the most interesting thing anyone had ever told him. He learned slowly to say the plain thing without an angle folded inside it, and it cost him visibly every time, and she found that she liked watching it cost him. Season by season, the thing she could not trust became a thing she could, not because he swore it, but because she watched it hold, when swearing would have been easier. He asked her again on an ordinary morning, which was the only kind of morning Elira had ever trusted. No hall, no court. The 2 of them on the cold walls of Corvin at first light, with the scaffolding of her rebuilt house going up gold behind them, and a cup of tea going cold in his hands because he had forgotten it the moment she looked at him. He did not kneel. He knew her too well for theatre by then. He only said, "It is only us, and no hall, and no crown, and no one to see. Elira of Corvin, will you have me?" And Elira, who had spent her whole life learning how not to be seen, looked the man full in the face, and let herself be seen entirely, and said yes. The whole of the Greywold came out for it, which she had not wanted and could not prevent, the lost daughter of a murdered house, and the boy king who had looked past a hall full of liars, and found the one true thing standing against the wall. She waited to feel like a fraud in the fine dress. She did not. It turned out a name was only a coat after all, and the woman inside it was the same one who had once told a king he was being lied to, and meant it. He wept during the vows. She had known he would. He was the crier of the 2 of them, always had been, the great alpha king of the Greywold, undone entirely by a plain woman's steady voice, and she held his hands and laughed at him gently through it, and did not weep herself, though the bond gave her away, wide open now and never again to be strangled shut, pouring her own joys straight into him so that he laughed even as he cried. "You are stuck with me now," she told him when it was done. "The lady chose. There is no taking it back." "Why would I take it back?" Varin said. "You are forgetting, my love. I chose first. I stood in a room and I looked at everything I was supposed to want, and I said her, and I have not once in all the ruin and the years wished the word back." He pressed his forehead to hers. "Best decision I ever made." "The only good one," she agreed, "in a very poor run of them." And she kissed him before he could argue, and for once in his life the king of the Greywold let her have the last word.